So this is my indictment speech on why torture should never be used within military interrogation. So my proposition is that the United Nations should come up with a comprehensive plan to monitor that each country is being compliant with the Geneva Convention. And although countries have agreed to treat prisoner of wars to a certain standard, they still treat them however they want and get away with many crimes. The problem among society is that most people believe that torture is an effective way of means to get what you want. And according to an article released last year called Ethical Social Justice, Do the Ends Justify the Means? They describe that when psychologists fail to utilize a decision-making model, they run the risk of a series of important ethical considerations. Ultimately, ethical missteps can have drastic effects on the entire field, including how society views the profession. The values-based and ethical decision-making model offers a strategy and a set of considerations to guide psychologists in the practice of ethical social justice, ensuring that the means and ends be held to the highest ethical standards. And according to a New York Times article written by Charlie Savage, a suspect, Abu Zabada, was sent to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and was brought to a panel of officers where he described that he was tortured in the agency's black site prison. He declared that his body had shaken when he stood for hours, naked and shackled in a cold room, being unable to shift his weight to an injured leg. He spoke of his humiliation at having to relieve himself in a bucket in front of other people, being treated like an animal. And he described being waterboarded until he couldn't breathe and was required and needed resuscitation. After a series of lawsuits, the agency was forced to disclose the information and concluded that Abu Zabada, who the CIA mistakenly thought was a top official in Al-Qaeda, should simply apologize. So according to a recent study, recent surge of asylum seekers in the European Union is raising questions about the EU's ability to integrate newcomers into the economy and into society, particularly those who need specialized services for the treatment of severe trauma. This study investigated whether rehab traumatized refugees represented value for money in terms of intervention costs per health gain and in long-term and societal perspectives. So the economic evaluation did a cost-utility analysis. The cost-utility analysis incorporated data on quality-adjusted life years for 45 patients who were treated at the Rehab and Research Center for Torture Victims in Copenhagen, Denmark from 2001 to 2004. To determine the incremental cost-effectiveness ratio, the data was collected for 44 patients. This was analyzed to evaluate the net social benefit of the program. And the results came back that the average cost of treatment was found to be about $32,000 per patient. And if you take this cost and multiply it per suspect that a country has under interrogation, this becomes an extremely expensive procedure and is coming out of the taxpayers' pockets. According to another article and study by Addison Redlick, Christopher Kelly, and Janae Miller, which is called The Who, What, and Why of Human Intelligence Gathering, Self-Reported Measures of Interrogation Methods. They did an online survey to examine the frequency and use of perceived effectiveness of interrogation methods for up to 152 military and federal level interrogators from the U.S. They focus on the who, which is the objective and subjective characteristics, the what, which is a situational and detainee characteristics, and the why, which is the intended goal of interrogation. So the indicated results that rapport and relationship building techniques were used most often and perceived as the most effective regardless of context and intended outcome. In addition, context was found to be more important in that depending on the situational and detainee characteristics and goals, interrogation methods were viewed as more or less effective. As stated in interviewing high-value detainees, securing cooperation and disclosures by Jane Goodman, Della Huntley, Natalie Marshuk, and Mandeep Dami, there are 4 types of coercive and non-coercive interview strategies, which are legalistic, physical, cognitive, and social. This is used to facilitate disclosure by high-value detainees and were examined in an international sample of practitioners. In response to social strategies, detainees were more likely to disclose meaningful information and earlier in the interview when report building techniques were used. They were less likely to cooperate when confronted with evidence as well. So disclosures were more complete in response to non-coercive strategies, especially with report building and fairness elements in respect to the voice. These findings augmented past theories on interactional processes and the evidence base of international best practices in suspect interviews. So, Ruth Bakley constructed an article called Conflictual Moralities and Ethical Torture, revisiting the problem of dirty hands. She described that it is possible for a person or politician acting in a situation of dirty hands not to believe themselves to be guilty, but still be a moral person. And we find this popular against many political leaders, and it is an issue because they feel like they are doing justice by enforcing radical consequences instead of pursuing modern conventional implementations. They assume that the correct repercussions are to humiliate detainees instead of taking a practical approach that is cost-effective and time-efficient. In a written article by Shannon Huck and Lucian Gideon Conway, the third who are involved in the Department of Psychology at the University of Montana, the title is called Ethically Investigating Torture Efficacy. In this article, they describe a new experimental method to ethically investigate one component of torture: the influence of physical pain on people's decisions to reveal secrets or false information. As part of the game, the participants were instructed to keep specific information hidden from an opponent while their hand was submerged in different temperatures of ice water. Further, their opponent pressured them to reveal the information, and the participants could choose to give false information to their opponent, true information, or a combination of both. The analysis revealed that participants were more likely to reveal false information when exposed to the cold pressure test, and this effect became more pronounced as the water became colder. So this backs up my argument that there are better alternatives that result in getting accurate confessions, and that pursuing torture runs the risk of getting the country in political and financial trouble. And in conclusion, there needs to be a comprehensive plan to monitor that each country is being compliant with the Geneva Convention, because there are lives and reputations at risk. This is unnecessary risk because 1, the method is not even the best way to reach our goal, and 2, it puts lives at risk.